Ladies and gentlemen, sports fans alike, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. One of the couple, two, three best podcasts around. So sit back, grab yourself a cold one and a Polish sausage, park your keister in the French room, and listen to Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
In Chicago, you know that all sports rock. The Bears, Hawks, Bulls, Cubs and Sox. Pick your favorite, you can choose. As long as the Packers lose. For everything you need to know, it's Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
On this week's episode, we have Jay Cutler with a new career move. Lots of angry Bears fans. Absolutely angry Bears fans. And more North Side, South Side baseball for you. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Rockford Ice Hogs. If you're not familiar with the Rockford Ice Hogs, they're the AHL minor league affiliate of the Chicago Blackhawks. What does that mean for you? You get to see the stars of tomorrow today at family-friendly, affordable prices. The season's now over, but that shouldn't stop you from heading on over to icehogs.com and picking yourself up a jersey, a hat, shirt, signing up for the season ticket email list so you can go to every game next season. Only 90 minutes from the city limits and fun for the whole family. Head on over to icehogs.com. Tell them Swerski Sports sent you. So, it's been an interesting week to say the least in Chicago sports.
Yeah, that's for sure. I think a lot of people are still trying to settle into this whole idea of Mitch Trubisky and what the Bears are doing. Some Cubs drama, not really player-wise, but on the field with their play. So I'd say so. Not to mention some Garpack stuff that I'm sure we'll get to.
Yeah. So, let's hold off on the Bear stuff for a second, and then let's jump into Cubs. Does that seem fair to you?
Yeah, that sounds good. The game's about to start right now, so it's fresh on the mind.
Yeah. This week we had a series against the Phils and a series against the Yankees. And the Phillies series was, all right, this is an interesting one because on paper the Phillies are arguably one of the worst teams in baseball.
Yep.
But they've been playing fairly well, and they played the Cubs pretty tough. Blew them out in the first game, 10-2. I was at the second game of the series. I took my wife. She grew up outside of Philadelphia, and she's a diehard Phillies fan. So we went to Tuesday's cold, rainy game.
Yeah, my brother was at that game.
Yeah, it stopped raining before the game, luckily, but it was a little chilly. But they had a rough one to start, but they pulled it out 8-3, and two wild ones, 5-4 wins back to back on the third or the last two games of the series. So ended up taking that one 3-1. But it was not a pretty series at all, even though they won 3 of 4.
No, it was a series where, on paper, you saw a 3-1 win, which would look like the Cubs would dominate, but they really didn't. It was a very grindy series. Only the one game that the Cubs won was a blowout, the 8-3 one that you were at. They either won one-run games or got completely blown out in that first game. You know, the Phillies were
Hold on one second.
pesky.
Hold on 1 second.
But yeah, that series was really grindy. There was really no clear-cut win for the Cubs except that one game that you were at, 8-3. But the other two, I think the one was in 13 innings with the wild throw that won it. The other was in regulation time, but, it was a close game, and the Phillies are a very grindy, very annoying team, very pesky. Don't really have any superstars to say for anything on their team, but they have a lot of those grindy, pesky young players that, they're trying to build around, and they're still pretty far off in the big scheme of things, but the Phillies like to do this. They get off to decent starts, and then they just completely plummet in the second half.
Yeah, they're not going to be anywhere near competing come even the All-Star break.
No.
But they are pesky, and they're a young team, so I expect them to get better because they do have no names on this team. They add a little bit of talent. I mean, it's a big city, so it's not like they're hindered by salary cap issues. So you add some veteran talent on here, and suddenly this could be a team that makes noise in a already noisy division.
Well, what's really funny is that you look at the Phillies now, and you're like, who are half these guys? When I know it's been almost 10 years since their World Championship, but in the late 2000s and early 2010s, those Phillies teams were stacked with stars, from in prime Utley to Ryan Howard to Cliff Lee. I think they had Roy Oswalt for a little bit, Raul Ibanez, Jimmy Rollins, Carlos Ruiz. Like, those were stacked teams with stars. The Phillies haven't been that in the past, 3-4 years now? But to me, it's still weird to think, because when I think Phillies, my mind still goes to those Ryan Howard, Chase Utley days, even though those days are long gone.
Oh, absolutely. It goes right to Jimmy Rollins is the one that I think of when I think of the Phillies in recent memory. But my wife would hear that list and angrily look at you and be like, "No, you forgot to mention the Flying Hawaiian."
Oh my goodness, yes. Shane Victorino.
My wife loves Shane Victorino.
Yeah, he was a fun player to watch. I mean, I remember him after his Philly days when he was on the Red Sox and he helped them to that 2013 World Championship. He had a lot of big hits that year. And even in that old age, he was still really, really fun to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. And but I mean, this Phillies team is, I think the point is that this is a far cry from what that team was. But they gave the Cubs all they could handle.
Yeah.
That first game was just a complete debacle, and I wish that would have been a rain cancellation rather than a delay.
Yeah.
It was just right from the start. You had Brett Anderson, who didn't make it out of the second and gave up 7 earned runs.
Yep. Yeah, and those conditions were terrible.
Yeah, and what we're seeing is early in the season is Brett Anderson doesn't pitch well when the ball is damp, and he clearly has had some sort of back issue, at least the last couple of outings, because he has not looked good, and he came out of his last start.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of talk about Brett Anderson. I'm sure, once we get into this Yankee series, but just speaking on that game that you were referencing to from the start, when the game started, it seemed like it was still absolutely downpouring. And the one thing that I was hoping by, the second, because they were already down 7-0 by that point, I'm just praying, I'm like, just don't anyone slip and tear up their knee or roll their ankle or fall and break an arm. I was just praying for them not to get injured.
Yeah, absolutely, because it was a pretty much done game, and it didn't get any closer. I mean, you can take away those seven runs, and Philly still win 3-2.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was the same thing. I turned that game on late because I was rushing around, and I was like, oh, it's rain delay. I'll turn it on later. I turned it on later, and I was like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah, that was actually my birthday. So I'm like, oh, maybe we'll see a birthday W. Nope.
No, you got white dog poop for your birthday.
Yeah, to say the least. The other thing about that game that I thought was really interesting is after Brett Anderson left, I think the only runs given up after that were from Justin Grimm.
Yeah, they were.
And a lot of that was in between the shutout innings was Mike Montgomery. And when you saw him do that, I was almost kind of saying, it seems like an audition to take his place, because it was kind of evident the way things have been going for Brett Anderson that he wasn't going to keep that fifth starter role very long. So I almost saw that as their way of stretching him out. So that was kind of a promising sign to me, is that he was looking pretty good, almost taking a starter role, because he went 4 or 5 innings that game. Yeah, I know he went more than 3.
Yeah, something. I think it was his way. Grimm 2-1. I want to say he went 4 2/3.
Yeah, so that's pretty good for a bullpen guy if you need someone in long relief. So I figured, hey, if he can do this in spot starts, I'd take it.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the direction they're going. And I can't, after these last couple starts by Brett Anderson, and it's funny because he hasn't had a mediocre start in any of his starts. He's either been really good or absolutely abysmal. There's been no in between.
Yeah, I mean, you look at his first game in a Cubs uniform, and that went really well. A lot of ground ball outs, and he was pitching pretty efficiently. I think he only gave up 1 run that game, and it was like at the very end of the start. But like his first, I want to say 4 innings, he only gave up like a few base runners, and he was looking pretty good. And then in his second game against the Dodgers, he didn't give up any runs, but he also walked a lot of guys and got a lot of line drive rockets that found gloves. So it was almost kind of like he got lucky, because if you looked at his FIP numbers were much higher than his ERA. So that kind of told you that whole story, which I just find interesting. And then, things got pretty ugly after that. Another start that he didn't really do that bad in was the one in Pittsburgh, but he got like 14 runs of support, so the pressure wasn't really on.
Yeah, and so it was just disappointing. And then the one that the Cubs won by a good number, it was the 8-3 win. And even though they won 8-3, and you're like, five runs differential, I was at that game, and it was, until the very end, it was eggshells because Lester looked shaky at the beginning, and if it wasn't for the Cubs getting some really good hitting from Chris Bryant and Javi Baez, that was a nail biter of a game too for a while.
Yeah, it was. It really was. And then they kind of pulled away. So by all means, there really was no blowout in that series where you could say the Cubs jumped on him early and never looked back, because the final game they jumped early, but then they gave up the leads. So, and the Cubs just gave up another first inning run.
It's mind blowing that they're not able to get out of the first inning without giving up a run. Like it just really sets the tone for the whole game when you're coming to bat for the first time and you're down already.
You know what? It's getting a little ridiculous. At the beginning of the season, the first few weeks, I wasn't like panicky about it. I was kind of annoyed, but I'm starting to legit get annoyed right now because this is ridiculous. They're setting records for first inning runs. I think I just saw something on Twitter where it's like the most runs given up through this amount of games for the first time in like decades. And this is a team that's a defending world champion team with a very deep rotation, and they're doing this. And once again, with all these pitches in the first inning, what do you got to do? You got to go to your bullpen early because they're not going past 6 innings.
Yeah, and I made a note to something to talk about is we need to start getting longer outings from our starters, and the thing is we can't because they're giving up a lot of runs and a lot of hits, and we're going to the bullpen earlier, and we're in a long stretch of very few days off through the month of May, and if we're taxing the bullpen like this, I mean, I know the bullpen has been very good, but if you tax them, you're gonna, if you're not getting great starting pitching and you're taxing your bullpen, eventually that's just a recipe for disaster.
And look what happened on Friday. Hector Rondon gave up that 3-run home run, and he's been really good so far, but the bullpen has had to work so hard. And he makes that one mistake, and now all of a sudden, Hector Rondon is the worst thing ever, and he needs to go away, and he's needs to be released, and yada, yada, yada. I mean, say what you will about Hector Rondon in the 9th spot. It's the last probably calendar year. It hasn't been as good as he's been before, but still, it's just so annoying that we have to put all this pressure on the bullpen because, let's face it, the bullpen doesn't have room for error. It just doesn't.
No, it really doesn't. And the longer that they have to keep going for extended innings, it's the more that they have to be perfect.
Yeah, and John Lester just got the final out in the first, gave up 1 run on a ground out, 2 hits and a walk. One of the guys was picked off. It was a guy who led off. I think it was Brett Gardner, and maybe it wasn't, but whoever was leading off for the Yankees, he got a hit, then he got picked off, then a walk, and then another hit, and then scored on a Castro ground out. And he pitched under 20 pitches. So right now I'm saying to myself, wow, a sub-20 pitch first inning and only 1 run? It's kind of sad how I'm kind of relieved that's what they gave up. It's gotten to that point. It's kind of annoying.
It really is. The third game of that Phillies series is Arrieta. After that first inning, had a very good game. 6 innings pitched, only 1 earned run after the first, but he gave up 2 in the first.
Right, and he gave up some rockets, and he gave up that 1 double that it was hit really, really hard, but Ben Zobrist misjudged it, and you could maybe say Jason Hayward would have caught that, but it was still rockets and walks, not a good thing to give up early on. Yes, he settled in. Yes, that's been a scenario so many times, but by the time you settle in and you already have 20-plus pitches under your belt, you're still not going to last very long unless you're literally pitching like 9-pitch innings the rest of the way, which is extremely difficult to do.
Yeah, and it just... I don't know why the first inning is a bane, why it's different than the other innings. The only thing I can think of is that other teams are just being super aggressive, knowing that the Cubs are coming out being aggressive and making contact on things in the zone.
Yeah, I really don't have an answer for it. John Smoltz said something. He had this theory about how now that the bullpens are inside, that it affects the way they're warming up and it affects how they're on the mound. I don't want to doubt a Hall of Fame pitcher, but A, that sounds like kind of a lame excuse, and B, that doesn't explain why they're doing the same thing on the road. You know?
Yeah, and... moving forward to that fourth game of that Phillies series is you actually had fairly decent pitching, but you just had bad baseball all around. Both teams combined 4 for 28 with runners in scoring position.
I think the most frustrating part of that game for the Cubs is when they had bases loaded, 1 out. I want to say it was the bottom of the 10th, and Wilson Contreras swings at the first pitch and grounds into a double play. Like, when that happened, I just threw my hands up, slammed my fist on the ottoman, and I'm just like, of course, because that's what I said. I'm like, don't swing at the first pitch and ground out. Don't swing at the first pitch and ground out. He swings, first pitch, ground out.
Yeah, it's both teams is how many times can you have bases loaded or runners on second and third with less than 2 outs and not be able to drive a run home.
Yeah, it's really frustrating to see that because you know how patient these Cub hitters are when they're trying to get on base, but sometimes you see when they have an opportunity to drive in runs, sometimes they get a little hack-happy and they kind of want to just go in there and slam one. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and in that case, it didn't. And it was the case where the pitcher for the Phillies wasn't really throwing strikes, so that makes it even more frustrating that you swing at the first pitch.
Yeah, that game, I know they won, and I was at the edge of my seat, and when they scored on an error, first thing I said was, fitting for this game, and even though I'm excited they won, and I didn't have to hear it from my wife about losing a series to the Phillies, it was just so unsatisfying.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And part of me is saying, I'll take the win, but what I was saying right after that series was, yeesh, the Phillies gave us a tough time And here come the rejuvenated New York Yankees. They're significantly better than the Phillies.
And I'm going to pause real quick. I totally jinxed this entire series. I totally jinxed it. I posted on my Facebook page because I know I lived on the East Coast for a long time, so I know a lot of Yankees fans, and I just posted, Yankees fans have been awfully quiet these last few years. And so yeah, I totally jinxed this one, and I take full responsibility. So Cub fandom, feel free to punch me if you see me.
Yeah, I'm going to punch you right now through the microphone. Way to go.
Yeah, I should have just shut my mouth.
Yeah.
And I wasn't,
you
you know
should.
what? And it wasn't even meant to be about the series. It was just, it was more about, like, I was listening to a national sports radio thing, and there was a bunch of Red Sox fans chirping, and it got me thinking. I was like, you know what? You don't hear much out of the Yankees fans anymore. You know, they're usually the loudmouths, and so I made that post, and then I was just like, man, now they're starting to chirp. And then the first game of that series, where they stole the game, Hendricks pitched a gem.
Yeah, he did.
5 1/3, no runs, sprinkled 6 hits, but the Cubs just didn't take advantage of opportunities. 2 solo home runs, and then the game gets blown in the 9th with that Gardner home run.
Yep. Boy, watching this game right now, they do not look good at all. Oof. It's frustrating. And I know people say, we won the World Series, but you know what? It's not 2016 anymore. It's 2017. I don't want to just be satisfied with one good year. I don't want to turn this into the 85 Bears, where since then, you're just still living on that. And I really am not saying that is going to happen. I'm just saying I don't want that kind of attitude in case it does. I want to see this team do more, and this team is better than the way they are playing so far this year. You know that they're better, and I keep telling myself that they will get better because I know how good they are, because people will call me panicky if I say anything, and I'll also be called, a meatball homer if I think nothing is wrong, so I really can't say anything and win. But there's just a lot of frustration right now, and I want the team to reach their full potential at some point, and I still think they will. I just want to see it badly because I know what they're capable of.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the 85 Bears. That was one of the most dominant teams ever, and they never went on to, people thought this would be multiple Super Bowls, and due to some injuries and some free agency issues and et cetera, they never realized that full potential. And that's why a lot of people outside of Chicago or outside of that time era don't regard them as one of the greatest teams, even though they just dominated people. And that's what my worry about this Cubs team is. They're so good, and if they win a World Series and then don't hit their full potential and maintain dominance in the, I know you can't. It's baseball, and it's an odd sport because you have a marathon for a season, and then the playoffs are these, anything goes, small sample size sprint. But you can't win the World Series every year. But to be able to make it to the playoffs and be a threat to win it for multiple years in a row, that's it, the least that you hope for.
Right, that's what we all hope for. We hope to see it over the next few years. And what's good about the Cubs is that they're not playing in the NL Central of 2015 when you had the Pirates at their peak and you had the Cardinals, who were still a 100-win force. The division is very different now. There's a lot of rebuilding teams on it, and there's a lot of teams that are kind of washed up / have their own issues. So if the Cubs let's say they're on a 10-game difference compared to last year, that's still 93 wins. And I know it's early to judge, but right now it looks like 93 wins could easily win this division. So at the end of the day, we know we just want to see them win the division. And I still think they will win the division. And I still think they will reach their full potential. But I just kind of question myself. How are we going to address these issues? I know that the organization doesn't seem concerned about it. But, there comes a point where you got to address something.
Behind the scenes, there has to be at least, maybe not panic, but there has to be some legit concerns. And
Sure.
They have to feel a little more pressure to bring in a decent starter, more so than they would have had it been closer to the stuff the staff had last year.
Yeah, and we all knew that this staff, the pitching staff, the starters in particular, we knew it wasn't going to be a repeat of last year because last year was ridiculous. I just didn't expect this dramatic of one. Now, of course, if they pick it up and things kind of even out later in the year, it will still never be what it was last year, but we'll still take it. One thing that I look at this pitching staff, it reminds me a lot of, so far, it's very early in the season, just keep that in mind. Remember the Cardinals pitching staff in 2015, and they were so unbelievably good. They were so dominant. And then the next year, they were one of the worst. They went from like the first to the worst. And it's almost like early on this season, the same effect is going on with the Cubs. Not saying it can't get better, but so far, that's kind of what it's reminding me of.
Yeah, and it's last season it just seemed like anytime somebody had a rough game, everybody else sort of picked it up a notch. When you had some rough outings and they were short outings, and you needed somebody to step up and have a long game to preserve the bullpen a little bit. You had Kyle Hendricks come and pitch 8 innings and a masterful game. Or you'd have Lester pitch 7-8 innings. And people would come through. And if you hit a rough patch, somebody would come through and step up and have a gem of a game. But you're just not having that. I know this is a season where there's ups and downs, but it just seems like all of the pitchers are having their downs at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Because remember that rough stretch last year in late June, early July, right before the All-Star break? You're seeing kind of similar things there, except I feel like when that happened, it was a combination of the pitching kind of going through a slump and a combination of just kind of fundamental errors. And I'm seeing a lot of that right now. The only big difference is, like I was going to say, the timing is very different. That was in the middle of the season when they were like so far ahead where they really could afford that kind of thing. And this is happening right at the beginning of the season where, you don't get off to the huge lead yet because the season just started, but there's also a full season ahead of you. Well, not a full season, but there's still a few months ahead of you. We're like, a fourth into the season, basically. So there's still a lot of time ahead of you. It's just weird, I think, to see how we react to this. Because before this scheme, with the Cubs being so bad, we would gladly take a 6-14 record right now. Like, gladly. We'd be ecstatic. We'd be having parties at the Cubby Bear. But now that the Cubs culture has changed and they're expected to win, it's a lot more frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's weird because I've watched seasons where they're bad and not felt frustrated just because you're like, well, I mean, what do I expect?
Yeah, they're bad.
But I guess the winning the World Series sort of removed a lot of the Cubdom as far as, my fandom. Like, I guess it's hard to say, is like, as being a Cubs fan is you sort of just wore this heaviness of, well, that's what being a Cubs fan is being disappointed a lot. And
Right.
And last year just took that away and said, you can be like every other fan, is that things can go right. Things can happen that are good. And I guess looking through it, that frame of reference this season, I'm just disappointed because you're expecting to win now. You're expecting more. You're not going, well, you know what? It's just a Cub thing that happened that you're up 2-0 in the bottom of the ninth and you give up a 3-home run, or in the top of the ninth and you give up a 3-run home run, and that's just kind of the way it is. But that's not how we look at it now. Is we look at it like, well, why did that happen? Is what happened?
Right. It's kind of funny because the way that unfolded on Friday, the one strike away, give up a 3-run home run, that's stuff that happened regularly from like 2009 to 2014. I mean, that happened so often, we were almost just kind of immune to it. A few years ago, when they were in that situation, I would have been saying, here comes a 3-run home run, one strike away. I would have absolutely been expecting that. On Friday, I was expecting Hector Rondon to strike him out. It kind of goes to show how just the way you feel towards these games is different. All these come from behind wins. When they're down, you expect them to try to come back. You're frustrated that you keep playing from behind, yet you expect them to come back. When the Cubs would be down 2-0 in the 6th inning, let's say 4 years ago, you pretty much threw in the towel and said, they're not going to score 2-3 runs in this game. This is over. So maybe you don't always think about it, but when you look back at it, you say, wow, the attitude towards this has really changed.
Yeah, you hope that something happens to turn this around, whether that be they come together for a team meeting and say, listen, we're not playing well, or the weather starts warming up and the bats start carrying the pitching for a while, or Joe brings in, JoJo the dancing clown, or whatever, or they make a early trade and bring in a stud pitcher to help buoy this starting rotation. Something just needs to click and take advantage of being in a weak division. I mean, still without playing well, they're still in first.
Now they're in second now, actually.
Oh, did they? Oh.
Yeah, the Reds have taken over first. The Reds are crushing the ball out of the ballpark. It's amazing.
Miserable.
Yeah. But no, to your point, yeah, I think you're going to see stuff like that. It's kind of surprising when you're looking at Joe Madden, you're saying, where is all this goofy stuff? With many managers, it's like, wow, they're doing this goofy stuff. With Joe Madden, you expect him to do more goofy stuff. And you haven't really seen it yet.
So, I mean, that's the Cubs in a nutshell. White Sox, on the other hand, have still playing very well. They had let's frame this, for them, they had a really good week. Split a 4-game series against the Royals. Ran into a buzzsaw of a Orioles team that was playing emotional after a interesting series against the Red Sox.
Yeah. What a bunch of drama there. I mean, this is something that's not going to just go away after that series. It's going to be lingering between those two teams the rest of the way.
Oh, and it wasn't even just like one incident. Like the racist chants and the 87 guys trying to plunk Manny Machado and couldn't hit him, and Major League Baseball intervening, and it got ugly. It was ugly.
It did. It really did, and it wasn't a good look, really, for the city of Boston or just baseball in general because of all the stuff that's been happening. Really kind of a shame.
And I mean, I know this is a Chicago sports show, but that Manny Machado rant, like, I applaud him. Like, there's I know most national broadcasters and things will be like, I am completely against using the ball as a weapon. You shouldn't throw at people. I mean, I think there's a time and a place for it. You should never throw at somebody's head, but plunk them in the back, plunk them in the hip, plunk them in the thigh, but you don't fire a 105-mile-an-hour fastball and plunk them. But you know what? Is you send a message. There you go. You hit our guy, we hit your guy. Let's get back to this game. But the Red Sox have carried this way too far, and as a superstar, like, you shouldn't have to live in fear of getting somebody thrown at your head.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and I don't blame him for being pissed. If I was in that situation, I'd be ranting too, to be perfectly honest. I wouldn't be happy about it at all. There's so much emotion mixed into this because there's a whole thing between personal things that are going on here, people personally attacking Machado, and then there's the whole things with Jones, and that kind of puts the spectrum into the whole environment. So all this stuff is being fired at you when you're involved in all this, not in a good way, then yeah, I would love to find a player who wouldn't be upset.
Yeah, but I mean, bringing it back to the White Sox is, the Orioles came in here with an emotional chip on their shoulder, and they're a very, very good team. They're a very underrated team. They don't get as much national attention as I think they deserve.
No, I really don't.
But they came in here and handled business against a White Sox team that was playing very well. A White Sox team that has played tough against everybody else, including the Indians.
Yeah, the Indians, the Tigers.
Yeah. But it's been interesting is that Royal series, the one earlier in the week, the 4-game series, and it was like kind of like a perfect microcosm of what this White Sox season has been. Is it's just been completely up and down. Get blown out one game, blow them out one game, get blown out another game, blow them out one game, and Avi Garcia, when he hits, they win. When he doesn't, they lose.
Yeah, I mean, he's driving in so many of their runs and is coming up with their big hits. Their offense as a whole, when you look at just in terms of runs scored, it's basically all or nothing. They're either going to score like 8-9 runs or they get shut out.
Yeah, I mean, that 6-1 loss to the Royals, Avi Garcia was out of the lineup.
Yeah.
The 6-4 win, he's back and started hitting. I mean, he made everyone around him better. Gio Soto was big at the plate that game, and you had a great start by Jose Quintana. 8 innings pitched, no hits. 4 hits, no runs. The 6-1 loss, Avi went 0 for 3, so they didn't score hardly any runs. And then in the 8-3 win, he goes 2 for 5 and help spark that offense. So it's kind of the you go, we go situation that we had with the Cubs last year and Dexter Fowler. It absolutely applies this year with the White Sox and Avisail Garcia.
Yeah, that's very true. Just a quick thing about the you go, we go. There are people bringing up the theory that the Cubs are sucking because they don't have Dexter Fowler, and they're bringing up the whole thing where when they didn't have Dexter Fowler last year, that's when they struggled. And though I don't really buy into that, it is a little eerie. I will admit, it is a little eerie.
I mean, the thing is, at the beginning of the season, he was absolutely on fire and helped carry the team.
He was carrying the team, yeah.
Him and Ben Zobrist were just like out of their minds hitting, and along with the great pitching, it won a lot of baseball games for the Cubs.
Yep.
But Dexter Fowler is like, he's okay. Like he's a pretty good player, but he's not like a superstar.
Well, he had a huge career year last year.
Yeah, but you think about it is you're better defensively than you were last year in the outfield, and production wise, are you getting that much worse this year? I mean, you have much better numbers from J-Hay, and the center field numbers, you're getting decent numbers from your center fielders. And
Better defensively, that's for sure.
And
especially with Almora.
Yeah, but I mean, you get great defense from them, but hitting wise, I mean, I didn't look what but Almora was batting pretty well for a while, and although he's not hitting well, Schwarber is definitely a threat at the plate. I mean, look at that Tuesday night win. He wasn't hitting anything, and he just rocketed one out of the park. Or in the Snakes.
Yeah, Schwarber's been really struggling lately, aside from a few home runs. That's for sure.
And a lot of people are calling for his head. And I mean, think about it: is the guy doesn't have a ton of major league at bats.
No, he doesn't.
You look back at any interview where Jed Hoyer and Theo Epstein have talked about young Cubs prospects, and they have been consistent in what they say is that there's a lot of guys that can hit in the minors. They want to see what happens when they struggle. Everybody struggles, and you want to see them work through it in the minors.
Right.
Schwarber never had that opportunity. He's never struggled anywhere. He went through the minors so quickly, came up to the majors, and has been either on the majors or injured for the rest of the time, and he hasn't struggled.
Yeah. Exactly. And, since we were kind of talking about the White Sox, it's kind of when you look at Yoan Moncada, he's tearing up the ball right now, but to start the season, he was really kind of up and down, and you're seeing him go through those kind of stages in AAA, to your point.
Yeah, so he's working through this, and he didn't get to do it through the minors. He's going to come out as a better player because of it. He's too good of a hitter for this to happen for an extended period of time. He's going to do whatever it takes to work out of it, but he's a young Major League Baseball player. They go through slumps. Every Major League player goes through slumps.
Yeah, absolutely. But back what I was talking about with the White Sox, what we were talking about their offense, we were kind of mentioning the all or nothing thing and talking about Avisail Garcia carrying the team. Because when you look at the team's lineup, if you take away Abreu and you take away Avisail Garcia and you take away the home runs from Davidson, that lineup sucks right now. It's bad.
Oh, it's really bad.
Yeah,
it's really bad. And they've been getting, for the most part, some really solid starting pitching. Their bullpen's not very good, but they haven't had to go to it very much. Even when their starters have given up a few runs, like Covey the other night gave up 6, but he still pitched almost 7. He pitched 6 2/3 innings. They didn't pull him out. They left him in.
Right, because their pitching either finds a way to give you a quality start, or even if it's not a quality start, they've at least been able to eat some innings. So that's one thing the Cubs have not been able to do, is they're not making it far into ball games, while the Sox, with their pitching, sure, they'll give up some runs, but they'll still have a good pitch count, and they'll still grind ways to get to like 7 innings.
Yeah, and that's where, I mean, difficulty with the Cubs is they're not getting those. I haven't pulled numbers, but I would really be interested in seeing what the starter's average outing is, and I would venture to say it's probably like 4 1/3, 4 2/3 maybe.
Yeah, I think I'd put the average around 5.
I mean,
maybe 4 2/3 or 5.
I just lowered it a little bit because you've had a couple of Brett Anderson outings where it was like not even a whole inning, and this time and 1 1/3 the last time. It's going to dip it a bit, but it's not very good.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not very good.
Right, yeah, you can't keep doing that. they've only gone 7 innings like twice so far this year.
Yeah, so that's something that's got to change.
Absolutely.
And,
it really
and
does.
we'll see what happens now. As I don't know how serious Brett Anderson's injury is, but he left the start the other night. Was he at last night or the night before?
It was last night.
He left with a sore back, and he got booed. And he took to Twitter, and the big props to him is he shouldered all that responsibility on himself and said, "I need to be better, injury or not."
Yeah. Personally, I think the Anderson experiment is, I think it's done. It just hasn't worked out. If they can get quality from Mike Montgomery, if they call up Eddie Butler and he does good, then they're just going to stick with that. That's how I really feel.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think we'll see what happens, but you have to think that Montgomery's going to take Anderson's next start, and depending on how he goes, is if he pitches well, that Brett Anderson's kind of SOL.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's just how it goes sometimes. While we're on the subject of Cubs and Sox, I was having some conversations this morning, with people on Twitter, and we were talking about the idea of Quintana going to the Cubs because, let's face it, the Cubs are probably going to want to and probably will go after another starting pitcher, and the Sox are trying to rebuild, and they're trying to get young assets. And I think some people may be underestimating what Rick Hahn would be asking for Jose Quintana. Because I feel like some people are saying, oh, just give him Candelario and Happ. I'm like, they're going to want more. They're going to want much more than that.
And I don't even know if they'd want those two prospects because they seem to be building around Tim Anderson and their stud minor league player, Yohan Moncada.
Right.
They've got their infield set. I mean, Ian Happ, I guess, could be a DH because he's not really a major league player as far as fielding goes. He's a pretty bad fielder. But
right.
I mean, Rick Hahn is going to ask for the moon and stars. He's going to try to get as much, if not more, than they got for Chris Sale because he's got more years under contract.
Right, and think about what he got for freaking Adam Eaton. If he got what he got for Adam Eaton, you really think he's going to go low on a Quintana trade, their last big major asset of those three? No, he's not.
No, because if you think about it, is this rebuild, the Cubs got a lot of guys that were a couple of years away. Is the White Sox arguably have guys that could step up later in the year, but probably will be knocking right at the door for next season, or definitely by the season after that. So you're much closer to being able to field a competitive team, than the Cubs were. So, I mean, what's Quintana, 28 years old? He's got 4 years left on his contract. He'll be 32 years old. You could have him be the ace of the staff, or at least a solid member of this rotation, and that's a huge leverage point to him, is because Chris Sale, everybody knew they had to trade Chris Sale. Everybody and their mother has still got a haul, but with Jose Quintana, he could be like, "Nah, we're gonna keep him. We're just gonna keep him," and that's gonna, is, if you think about it, is the option of them keeping him, and the realistic option of them keeping him is another player in the market. Because if you have, say, 6 legitimate teams that are trying to trade for Jose Quintana, and you throw the White Sox legitimately trying to keep him, that's all that does is add like a 7th team in there, driving up the price.
Yeah, exactly. And it also, you got to look at the desperation of other teams that have the kind of prospects that would be ideal for the White Sox. Like, everyone talks about the Astros because they have so many prospects. So there's a lot of linking up with him and there's talks about the Yankees even, because they're absolutely loaded top to bottom. So, it's going to be interesting how the market fluctuates this between Rick Hahn and his selling price and the demand price, because that does affect things.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I don't know if they'll move Quintana this this All-Star or trade deadline, but they may just wait until the offseason to try to do it.
Yeah, and I guess what is going to happen with that is when they're looking for a trade partner and they're looking at the demand and they're looking at what's available, what they want to buy, sometimes it takes a little while to develop some of your assets to kind of see where your strong points are. Now, granted, some rebuilds, they'll just say, just give us every valuable player regardless of the position. But I feel like with the way the White Sox are going, they kind of want to approach this step by step, address area by area. You got your middle infield. Maybe we're going to look for some more outfielders for the future. Maybe we'll look at some more starting depth. So I guess Rick Hahn is just going to evaluate, and sometimes the timing, though it seems right to the fan, doesn't seem right to Rick Hahn. And Rick Hahn's the one calling the shots, and I always say in a front office, no matter what sport, there's always something they know that we don't. So maybe people are criticizing him right now for not trading him in the offseason before this season, but if he wasn't getting the right offers or not getting what he wanted, then you're not just going to do it just to do it. You got to really want to do it and have a reason for doing it. And that's why when people ask when Quintana is going to be traded, it's hard to know. It could be later this year. It could be at the trade deadline. It could be in the offseason. Maybe they don't trade him at all. It's really hard to know for sure.
They could even trade him through waivers after the trade deadline.
Sure. I mean, it's possible. I right now, I think anything's possible.
Yeah, and I mean, just looking at the list of free agent starters after the season ends, it's not that great. So, there's CC Sabathia, but he's well beyond his prime. Jeremy Hellickson, meh. You've got Arrieta. You don't know what you're getting from him. Francisco Liriano. You don't know what you're getting out of him.
Either good or bad.
Matt Garza, Bartolo Colon, Andrew Kashner, Clay Buchholz, Tyson Ross, Derek Howland, Miguel Gonzalez, Brad Anderson, Edwin Jackson, Scott
goodness.
Feldman, Trevor Cahill,
all these former Cubs,
Bronson
man.
Arroyo, Mike Pelfrey. There's not a lot of names on there, so you're going to have teams that are going to be like, crap, we're going to have to trade for a pitcher.
Right. It's not like a few years ago when Price, Shields, Max Scherzer, and John Lester were all on the market and people wanted to go spend their money on them. I mean, it's quite the opposite, and it hasn't been that way the past two off seasons, really, because the off season from 14 to 15 was one of the off seasons that had as many available ace quality pitchers on the market. So that was way different than what you're going to see now. You're going to see, like you said, a lot more trades and a lot more stuff like that.
Yeah, so it's so it's a lot of people are upset that they haven't traded Quintana, but it's going to come, and it's going to come when the asking price is that the White Sox are asking is met, and they're not gonna sell him on the cheap. They're going to either utilize his pitching skills on their team to make the White Sox better, or they're going to trade him for a king's ransom.
Yeah. And I think Rick Hahn is going to weigh the king's ransom at every possible way.
And Rick Hahn is not a stupid GM. He's a very smart man, and he's in a position where you're not going to fleece him.
No, not at all. I mean, there's some GMs where you could obviously manipulate them, but I really don't think Rick Hahn would be one of those people. Rick Hahn is an insanely smart man, and it's unfortunate that he had to play behind the philosophy of Williams and Reinsdorf because it made him look stupid, even though it really wasn't his plan. What he was doing was presenting multiple scenarios to Jerry. And every time Jerry would say, let's go with the scenario to win now, let's go with the scenario to win now, and not think about the future. And that reflected on Rick Hahn, and it was not justified because that wasn't his ideal scenario.
Yeah, and he's a very smart guy, and he's got the reins now, and he's going to build this his way. And you may win a trade based on the fact that somebody didn't work out, like Yo Moncada.
Sure.
Like he may come up and not be great in the majors. I mean, he's a prospect. He may just not work out and have a lot of unmet promise, but at the time is Rick Hahn is going to get a lot for him, for whoever he trades away.
Right. And with all those things that he did get, it's kind of like the Cubs where you can afford to have a bust or two, and if the others work out, then you know what? You'll still gladly take it. Because look at the other deal with Adam Eaton. The main guy in that trade was Lucas Giolito, and so far things haven't really been going good for Giolito. But another guy in that trade was Dane Dunning, and right now he looks spectacular in the minors. So maybe the centerpiece of that trade doesn't work out, but if Dane Dunning and Ronaldo Lopez do work out, then you're still going to see that trade as a win because of all those assets you got.
Oh, yeah. So, he's getting lots of picks and lots of bites at the apple. You can't expect every prospect to work out, but the more you have, the better chances you have to get a solid contributor.
Exactly. And Rick Hahn knows that, and he is going to get as much as he possibly can with any trade, and he's got plenty of trades to make. It's not only Quintana. Maybe he tries to trade Abreu at some point if it's not even this year. And David Robertson is probably the other one I think who could go this year to a team that needs a closer. So he's going to get as much as he possibly can.
He's going to flip Holland, too. If Holland keeps pitching like he is, he's going to flip him. Because that is a cheap contract. Yeah. He's pitching well, and he's going to get a pick for him. Or, a player for him.
Yeah. Maybe someone needs a fifth starter just to kind of have his insurance. You might not get a lot, but you might get something.
Or you have a team right down at at the deadline is fighting for a playoff spot, and they either have an injury or one of their starters is just not pitching well, and boom, there you go.
Exactly.
So that's exactly why they brought him in, is a guy that can, with experience, that if he didn't pitch well, then that means the Cubs or the White Sox got a better draft pick, and if he does play well, they can flip him. And it was a low investment.
You know what's so funny about the Derek Holland thing? I said that no matter what the White Sox plan was going into this season, he was destined to be a member of the White Sox, because if it was the White Sox of last year and before, when they tried to half-ass their rebuilds, like Derek Holland would be the perfect veteran that had some injury problems that they'd go after to try to win. Now they're getting him on a low-risk, high-reward deal, which is a smart move when you're going cheap and you're not planning to win, and you're planning to get any kind of value you can. So, I don't know, do you agree with that? Do you not agree with that? Do you kind of see what I'm saying there?
And White Sox, it's funny, the White Sox are totally a team that have a type of guy that they bring in that always ends up on their team.
Oh, yeah. You look at some old player who's had either some injury problems or haven't been good in maybe the last, 3-4 years. Like, I could not believe last year when they depended on a 40-year-old Jimmy Rollins to be their starting shortstop to compete. I could not believe that.
If Kenny Williams was still running this team, You know who would be a total White Sox guy? Matt Kemp. Matt Kemp.
Who's that? Yes. Oh my goodness. He would be a prime target. Yes. That is so accurate.
That's a guy, where he could hit a lot of home runs, but he could just be miserably awful.
Yeah, exactly. Someone who's older, who's past his MVP type years that he had in 2011. He would be a perfect White Sox player. The other guy who I thought would be a perfect White Sox player was, and I actually thought they were going to do this just based on their track record, when Tim Lincecum was doing that workout, I'm like, oh my God, the White Sox are totally going to go after him.
I really thought that too.
They didn't,
I really thought that. And
Yeah.
you know what? To be honest, I never even followed up what he's done. I haven't even followed up.
Went to the Angels, was really bad, got released.
That's what I figured would happen.
Yeah.
But speaking of Reinsdorf, let's briefly touch on the Bulls. They had their end of season press conference with Gar Forman and John Paxson, and last year's press conference they said that there would be accountability for anything that didn't happen or that happened that wasn't what they wanted to or wasn't good, and any poor performance would have accountability. And basically they said we're staying the course and we're stuck with our head coach.
Oh my God, listening to that press conference, I listened to the snippets because CSN and 670 The Score all provided those snippets, so I'd go on their websites and I'd listen, or I'd be listening to 670 The Score and they'd play either an interview with Mully and Hanley or stuff from their press conference. So you heard a little bit of everything of what they've said the past week, and what everyone gets out of it and what I get out of it, which is ridiculous, they emphasize so much on developing these young assets while trying to win with veterans. It's all over the place. They talk about this culture that they have that can't even be identified. They talk about how they value their young assets, who I think are mostly no better than role players, and how they value their young assets when they're sending them down to develop, quote unquote, in the D League.
Yeah, I don't know who this young talent is supposed to be that they're developing. Campaign
Valentine Portis?
I mean, Portis had one good game in the playoffs. Other than that, he's been pretty bad. Valentine's been bad, and he's played a lot in the D League. Campaign is terrible.
Yep.
I honestly, I would say your best shot of any of people succeeding is maybe Jaron Grant.
At the most.
None of those guys are gonna. Unless you're putting Paul Zipser in there, and then in which case you're like, well, Paul Zipser probably has the best shot of being serviceable, but your veterans are old, and you except for Jimmy Butler, and you're terrible at addressing people in the draft, finding young talent in the draft and in free agency. You're just bad at it. And John Paxson pretty much said, well, he's going to take more reins on the day-to-day operations. But a few years ago, when he added Gar Forman, he said the team is going to be better because he's going to not have to do those day-to-day things, and he was going to pass those to Gar Forman, and that's why the team was going to be better.
Right.
But now he's saying, well, I'm going to rein that back in, and that's why we're going to be better. At what point do these two dopes be accountable for the situation that the Bulls are in?
And when you listen to them talk and you listen to the way they go about their business, the way they try to describe it, whether it's how they run things in the office or what they're doing with the team, it seems like they go on a tangent and just ramble without actually answering the question and just spewing stuff off the top of their head because they really don't know what a long-term plan is, and they really just kind of want to, I want to say, like, stall by just saying, we're going to develop and win. We're going to develop and win. Well, what's the plan? If you're trying to win and you're trying to develop, then what's the ultimate goal? What is your philosophy? What is the culture? You talk about a culture. What is it? What is the culture? And yeah, go on and brag about the find of Jimmy Butler. You keep bringing that up. Yeah, what else have you done besides the lucky pick of Jimmy Butler?
How many drafts has this team had? I mean, if they try to take credit for Derrick Rose, that's just dumb because they lucked out into winning the draft lottery, and they made the obvious choice of who to pick. But outside of that is how many bites at the apple has this team had and just not been able to be successful with it. I mean, just miserable draft pick after miserable draft pick. And Mirotic was supposed to be their secret weapon, that they were outsmarted everybody and they were tucking him away in Europe until the time was right. And then they brought him over, and now he sucks and he's going to be a free agent. And, there's another lost cause.
But they're probably still going to bring him back. I guarantee you they're going to bring him
contract.
Back. And yeah, really. And then they're going to use the whole excuse, we're still developing him, we're still very high on him, develop win now, the boom. Yeah. So
but I don't want to dwell on this too much. Is next week I'm going to try to bring on, you haven't had a chance to meet them yet, there's a podcast I've been friends with for a while called Ball, Bawl, with Chris and Big Dave, and that is their thing, is the Bulls. And they messaged me the other day that they would love to be on to talk about the Bulls on the show. So hopefully next week we can have them on.
Awesome.
To get their input, because that they've got their finger on the pulse with that team, and they're really funny guys. So they add some humor to the sadness that's the Bulls.
Yeah, and I got some questions from one of my friends talking about who they're going to go after in free agency, and I'm sure they'd be the perfect people to talk about that with.
Yeah, actually, while we were already recording, I got a message asking what we thought the Bulls were going to do. So if you're listening, we hope to cover that next week with people that are much more knowledgeable about Bullsdom than I.
Yeah, because, I try to pay attention to the basic things of the Bulls, but they've turned me off so much that I don't follow them day to day. Kind of their overall statistics from the year, I couldn't tell you a lot of it just because I've completely lost interest with them.
And the sad
with the
part
way
is
things are going.
The first two games against the Boston Celtics in the playoffs, I was like, this is the team that I was expecting to see all along. And then
right.
Rajon Rondo gets hurt, and then we get a big dose of Gar Forman and John Paxson staring at me going, duh, duh.
Yeah, because when we went into the season, like I said, I obviously didn't expect a championship, but I thought, with those guys on the roster, I don't really get it. I don't get how that's going to get us to a championship. So even though I was upset about that, I at least expected entertainment. And the first two games, that's what we got. No expectations, but entertainment. And then that completely fell into no expectations and no entertainment and utter embarrassment, especially 0 wins in front of your home fans. And the most vocal the home fans was booing Mitch Trubisky.
Yeah, which was stupid. But let's move on to a final topic, the Chicago Bears. This is the one I think everybody wants to talk about. Yep. I guess we'll get this out of the way quickly, is Jay Cutler is no longer going to play in the NFL. He is going to broadcast on a 3 person team for Fox on Sundays. He'll be on teaming up with Charles Davis and Kevin Burkhardt, and he will be calling the Bears versus Atlanta Falcons game to start the season.
You know, I'm happy for him. I think he'll do a good job. He's kind of got this dry humor to him that might be good on a broadcast like that. I could totally see him being successful as a broadcaster. And you know what? It takes a lot of pressure off. He could still stay in the game he loves, but he doesn't have to go out there and perform. He's just kind of having fun analyzing it. And he's easing his way into it with this three-man broadcast team. It's not like they're throwing him in with Joe Buck or Tom Brenneman. You know, he's starting with some of the B-list guys, but, you know, you work with them, you make it successful, then maybe you work your way up a little bit.
It was funny. As soon as they said, oh, he's going to be with a three-person team with Charles Davis, I was like, oh, man. That means he's going to do a bunch of Bears games because we always get Charles Davis.
Yeah, unless it's the Packers, it's always Joe Buck, and it's always Joe Buck, you know, having reactions to Aaron Rodgers that
he claims he doesn't have.
You know what I mean. It's so obvious. I'm sorry. He claims he doesn't have. It's so obvious.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But, yeah, I think he will do a good job, too, I mean, regardless of what people think about him, he's actually a very smart guy. He's got a dry sense of humor,
yes,
but he's a funny guy. And I read an anonymous quote from a former teammate, and the teammate started it off by saying, I really like Jay Cutler. I consider him a friend. But he said he thinks everybody is an idiot, and that's his baseline. And it really sums up, like, anytime he talks to anybody, you're like, yeah, that pretty much is it. He's just assuming that everybody is just so stupid, and he just can't deal.
Yeah, that is kind of funny. It could make for a funny segment or kind of a funny bit on the broadcast.
It'll be interesting to hear him, but I mean, he's a very bright guy, and I think he realized the situation is because from what I understand, he hasn't retired. He just said he's no longer going to be playing in the NFL because I think he just realized that you know, there's either voluntary retirement where you just decide you're going to hang him up, or the league decides for you. And he's the latter, and
right.
He didn't want to. And I think, for as great as Brian Urlacher is, I think the way he went out was a little bit embarrassing.
Yeah,
Same
it wasn't
thing
great.
With Lance Briggs, same thing with Peanut Tillman. I think they all went out in kind of embarrassing fashion, and I think the Bears didn't. They helped facilitate the embarrassment, but those guys just didn't realize the time was up, and you know, and I'm glad that Jay Cutler saw the writing on the wall that the NFL was telling him it was time, and he headed to greener pastures.
Right. And at least with Peanut Tillman, at least he was always classy about it, because that's what Peanut Tillman is. He's a class act about it. It was very unfortunate to see him go down like the way he did in, you know, injury-riddled, can't play, tearing up on the sideline. It was really, really tough to see that. But at least he'd eventually handle it well. You know, he retired as a Bear and yada yada. But yeah, you're definitely right about Jay Cutler in this sense. He realized that, you know, his playing career doesn't really have much demand right now, so stay in the game you love, but a new chapter of it. And
absolutely,
that's what he's doing.
One of his first post-NFL ness is he made a comment that he felt that the Bears slighted Mike Glennon, and that he was willing to reach out to him to talk, and he called for the Bears to not play Mitch Trubisky in 2017 because it would be bad for his career if they played him too early. And I think it's something we all agree on. Well, not the Mike Glennon part, but the Mitch Trubisky. As far as Mike Glennon is, I want to say this is, would I be upset if the shoe was on the other foot and I was Mike Glennon? Yeah, I think I think I would be a little butthurt that that they went and drafted somebody. But in the end, the realization is that they are depending on Mike Glennon to be their starter. They are depending on Mike Glennon to be good. And they are going to give every opportunity to Mike Glennon to be the best he can be. And not a lot of other teams were giving him the opportunity to be handed a starting spot. He could have got a lot of money.
Right. Or
He
$18
was
million.
offered quite a bit of money by Tampa Bay to stay and be their backup, but it was a backup role. Is Mike Glennon now has the driver's seat. He's got $18 million and in his pocket, guaranteed, in his pocket,
Guaranteed.
no matter what else happens, and he is auditioning for 31 other teams. They are giving him a 16-game tryout, and if he plays really well, he's going to get a big contract.
Right. And maybe a contract with a team that could potentially be even better for him playing-wise, whether it's the system, whether it's the coach, or whether it's their position with contending.
Because what will happen is if he plays really well, is either the Bears pay him and play Trubisky and keep him as the backup and pay him, $16 million per season, or they say, listen, we will trade you, and they trade him away, and I think it fully guarantees the other 2 years, so he's being paid $16 million for the next 2 years, which is a good sum of money for a quarterback with minimal experience. So
Right.
I don't
Exactly.
I don't feel sorry for him. I mean, I would be butthurt as well, just because of you were hoping that you could win this job and guarantee that money for yourself. But it's not like it's Bears or bust. It's if he plays really well,
Right.
he's setting himself up to make a big payday.
And you know what? If he does set himself up and he does succeed, whether it's with the Bears in the future or most likely another team, and he ends up winning the ultimate prize, and he ends up turning his career into a very successful one, then he'll have his time with the Bears to thank
absolutely.
that.
It's going to be the Bears that help him go on, because otherwise he would just be stuck as the backup. If the Bears didn't come along, he would be stuck as the backup for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he would be a career backup, because at some point, once you've been a backup for a long time, is you are labeled a backup, and that's all you'll ever be. And the Bears are giving him the opportunity to start, and he should be thankful that a team went out and said, you are going to be our starter, and he's not going to have to compete in training camp. He's handed the reins.
Right. Because if Mike Glennon does really, really good this season, and let's say he gets the same amount or more money from another team, think about how much money that would be compared to what he was getting earlier. And it's a win-win right there. And, being a backup on Tampa Bay behind a young superstar quarterback, well, I shouldn't say superstar yet, but has a lot of potential. You would feel kind of crappy because you're not getting any attention. You're not going to be getting much playing time if he stays healthy. At least now you can, quote unquote, audition for better things, and these auditions give you a lot of money.
And it's so Mike Glennon is in a good spot, regardless of if he realizes it or not yet. And hopefully he's got people around him that let him know what he has here at his disposal. But I want to get to some of the comments we've gotten, and normally when we get questions, comments, concerns, etc., I paraphrase them and sort of incorporate them into what we talk about. But there was quite a few of them, and I wanted to just absolutely read them so I didn't miss the gist. So the first one I have is the Bears will win 4 to 5 games next year. Giving them 6, 7, 8, 9 wins is really a stretch. And I absolutely agree with you based on the way the draft went. But I believe what we were saying is that if they would have drafted either Solomon Thomas or Jamal Adams and gone stud defensive players and not traded anybody, that with how well their defense would have improved. We expected them to improve with these top talented players, that you would expect more wins. And we said 6, 7, 8 wins. And the reason we weren't projecting the wins, I believe what we said was, if you added these defensive players, where do you expect to draft next year? Probably have 6, 7, 8, 9 wins, which puts you in the 12, 13, 14, 15 draft spot. So it's significantly worse of a draft position, and you would not be in a position to move up to take a quarterback next year if you drafted these defensive players. I think that's what we were going at without going back and listening.
Yeah, we were using those win totals very loosely because with these hypothetical scenarios, we were blending those other scenarios together. So it wasn't really a projection. It was just more of a loose scenario analysis. But I could see where the way we talked about that, I could see why you'd get that mixed up. So just as a clarification, we were using that very loosely, and that wasn't really us projecting their win total right now.
Yeah, I'm just saying is that Ryan Pace knows, everybody in the world knows that quarterback is the most important position in the NFL. And if I'm not saying that Mitch Trubisky is the answer or that he's better than some of the quarterbacks that are coming out next year. But if everybody in the Bears organization, all the scouts, everybody in the building agreed that Mitch Trubisky was far and away the number one quarterback on their draft board, and they decided that they wanted to address the quarterback position. And I'm not saying that Mitch Trubisky is the answer. I'm just saying they all feel that. So if they go defense now and draft stud defensive players now, that's going to hurt their draft position for the 2018 draft, and it's going to make them so they have to move up from, say, 10, 12, 13 pick to 1 or 2. It's going to cost them a 2019 first rounder on top of that. So to give up a third and a fourth round instead of a first round, it's a better value. So that's what my point was, is if they identify that this guy is somebody they love, I would rather them do that now when it's going to be cheaper to move up one spot than to move up, 10, 12, 13 picks.
Yeah, when you do those kind of things, you also think about, there are uncertainties with every single scenario, but when you look that far ahead and you look at other scenarios in that spot, then there's even more uncertainty. So sometimes you just gotta tackle things if you really feel that it's right. It may not seem right to the casual fan, or it may not seem right to any of us at times, but to him, to the man who's running the show, to the man who knows everything, it seemed right.
Yeah, and I mean, and think about it, is if you decide you're not playing Mitch Trubisky next year, you're just going to redshirt him and let him learn and let him practice, whatever, and the Bears suck, and they don't have the help on defense from some of the picks that they could have had, then guess what? They'll be drafting pretty high next year, and they can use that on a stud player, and they could even trade back to a team that's trying to get a quarterback because they've already got one. So, right there, silver lining. The next comment was, equal trade. Bears switch picks with 49ers and also give up a third and fourth. Yes, when Bears also include that third rounder in 2018, that is why the 49ers agreed to take the trade. Yes, the 49ers could have traded with the Browns, but then they would have dropped back 10 spots in round 1. The 49ers didn't want to do that. The rest is history. What did the Bears give up for Cutler? 2 number ones, a third, plus Kyle Orton. What did the Bears give up for Mitchell? 2 thirds and a fourth. Not even close. And that's true. They gave up an awful lot to bring Jay Cutler to this team.
Yes, they did. They went all out to get Jay Cutler because when you look at the Jay Cutler trade, most people kind of casually remember it as giving them Kyle Orton for that. But no, there were those picks involved. So there was more to
two
that.
First rounds.
Right. And that's not really talked
absolutely.
about that much.
And if you look at the trade, the value charts for the draft picks, it's actually a pretty much dead even trade for what they gave up until they added that pick for next year. And the way you kind of look at the pick values for the next year is most teams down value it by 1 round. So a 3rd rounder next year would be the same as a 4th rounder this year, just because. So it's
Right.
in the value, it's like a 4th rounder. So it's a minimal give up. I mean, to move up 1 spot, it takes draft capital. And if the Bears correctly identified that Mitch Trubisky is the answer, I mean, think about it is, like say a couple years ago when you had Ndamukong Suh was just a dominant beast in Detroit, would you have rather had a dominant beast as a defensive player like Ndamukong Suh, or would you rather have Aaron Rodgers? It's, if all things given, you'd much rather have a really good quarterback than pretty much any other position, because and we've never had a truly great quarterback in this franchise.
And I'll say this. I know there's some red flags on Mitch Trubisky, and that's by no means me saying that I know he's going to be a bust, because I still think that if they develop him right, then he can be something in the NFL. So that whole idea at least gives you as a fan some excitement knowing that there is a young asset in the grooming, that there is something to maybe look forward to, because there is the chance that he does turn out, and if he does turn out, then you'll be really happy with it. So there's a high reward with this, even though it is risky, and there is a chance that it could totally fall flat on its face, but at least there is something to look forward to. Because in past years, there was no young quarterback in the system. There was no young stud, kind of working his way in. That's a huge, game changer. Yeah, there was Jordan Howard last year. And yeah, there was Alshon Jeffrey a few years ago. But when we first got Jeffrey, they were still, a contending team. So having kind of this asset being groomed as the next face of the franchise, potentially, with the chance of that happening, at least makes things a little more interesting.
I agree. And I think a lot of ways Bears fans are scared of the quarterback position because we've never gotten it right. We're one of the oldest franchise in the sport, and we've never gotten the quarterback position right.
Then just the track record of recent failures with so many picks. That adds on to it too. It's a combination of those
things. The best quarterback we've ever had is a laughing stock around the league in Jay Cutler. That's where we're at.
Right.
So the next comment is, I remember watching Tampa games when Glennon was a rookie. He had poise in the pocket and a 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio on a bad Tampa team. Lovey then enters and brings in his guy, McCown, and names him the starter without any competition because, Lovey. Glennon will give us solid quarterback play this season. I think he'll be worth at least a 5-win improvement. We still have many holes, but improvement is there. 8-8, bear down.
Yeah, I saw that comment. And, I do agree with the fact that Glennon can give you some solid work. For me, it's kind of hard to put a fully projected win total. Like I said earlier, we were just using them as loose scenarios, but for me, it's hard to say how many wins Mike Glennon brings. But I do feel that he is capable of bringing some very solid play. Do I expect Pro Bowl, Tom Brady, Drew Brees type stuff? No, but we'll take very solid play. It's something we'll take no matter what the record is in a year where you're not expected to compete because you're rebuilding.
We had a big chunk of last season we played with David Fales and Matt Barkley. So anything's an improvement there. And I agree that there's a lot of holes on this team, but
absolutely there are many
I've
holes.
said this a bunch of times, is free agency is not over. Is until they take the field on that first game, they're Ryan Pace is going to be working to fill holes. And look what he brought in. He brought in Jay Howard to fill that other defensive tackle spot. And if you don't know the name Jay Howard, think back to the game. It was Cronus Grasu's first game as a starter for the Bears. And they were playing the Kansas City Chiefs, and he just got bulldozed. And the guy sacked Jay Cutler, and there was a fumble. That was Jay Howard. And so you have a guy who 2 years ago was absolutely dominant and was a really good player, and last year he missed half the season with an injury. The Bears are bringing him on a 1-year deal, a prove-it type deal, and if he's healthy, that's just going to make the Bears' defensive line really solid.
And the defensive line as it is has some pretty good pieces on it.
I mean,
let's face it.
We
saw
at the end of the season, Leonard Floyd get a lot better, and with the whole offseason and a fresh training camp, I feel like he's going to take that next step. You're going to have Pernell McPhee actually come into camp healthy, be able to play. We saw what Akeem Hicks can do. You put a Jay Howard on the other side, and hopefully you have an Eddie Goldman that's healthy. If that's the case and you can maintain some semblance of healthiness, that's actually a pretty good front defensive line.
Yeah, especially look at the second half of the season. You saw Akeem Hicks do some really good things, and I think Akeem Hicks is one of Pace's best moves so far as a GM. I thought bringing him in was a fantastic move. And him with some more improvements on that line, I mean, you cannot take that for granted. And that line has kind of helped the Bears defense last year put up some decent numbers at times, because there were times when the Bears defense was actually one of the better statistically defenses, in the
problem
league.
is that team just didn't take the ball away. They were not getting turnovers.
Right.
But I mean, you add that defensive line and a healthy linebacking core. It's sure you still have a lot of questions as defensive backs. I mean, a lot of questions. We've got 87 cornerbacks. Can any of them play? What's Prince Amukamara going to look like? What are the safeties going to look like? But at least that front seven is starting to look fairly solid, and especially with Vic Fangio coaching them, is you have to feel much more comfortable. And as much as I like Mitch Unrein, is Jay Howard, healthy Jay Howard is such a vast improvement over Mitch Unrein.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And what you said is true. The biggest concern with him is if he can stay healthy. But if he does, the reward is there.
He played 15 games the year before, but last year he only played 8 games and had some nagging injuries, but nothing serious per se of looking forward to this season. So there's a lot of holes in this team, but Ryan Pace is going to keep trying to develop or bring in talent through the draft and then plug holes with 1-year deals with veterans. And that's his philosophy, right. And we're going to keep seeing that. And as many holes as there are on this team, I at least feel much more comfortable that he's addressing them. Like, I was very concerned about that 5 technique position, and when he signed Jay Howard, I let out a sigh of relief. I went,
right,
okay, all right, he's still working here. And if you think about it, is Josh Sitton got brought in right at the end of last season, or right at the end of training camp last season, and he's still working it. And there's going to be more cuts of guys that make too much money that can still play a little bit, but they're not worth the money they're making, and you're going to see those guys fall, and the Bears will look to bring some of them in too.
I'm going to talk 1 minute about the whole "this team has so many holes" thing, because it does, and Bears fans know that. And that is honestly the reason why a lot of us were so upset with the draft. It's because they made the moves that they did knowing how many holes they have and knowing how deep the draft is. Because we figured with all these picks that we could have filled those holes with those picks. But the fact that they went out for a quarterback, we were kind of confused because A, you signed Mike Glennon, and B, you did that because, yeah, we want a young quarterback for the future, but we figured that they try to plug as many holes as they can. But as time goes on and you look at the ultimate plan that you can see and you look at what he's doing in free agency, you understand it a little better. So that's why you were seeing a lot of the reaction, and how I felt was the same way. I figured we have so many holes, it's not just that one hole. We have so many of them. But that he's addressing it now, that's good to see it. It calms the nerves a little bit.
My philosophy is that if you don't have really good quarterback play, then every other hole on your team you've got to fill really solidly. If you fill your quarterback spot with a very good player, then you don't have to fill the other spots with as much talent. Think about what the Packers did last year with a wide receiver as running back. Let that sink in.
Yeah, that was nuts.
The Green Bay Packers were one of the best teams in football last year, and they had a wide receiver playing running back, and they still dominated because Aaron Rodgers is a Hall of Fame quarterback. If Mitch Trubisky, if Ryan Pace is right, and I keep saying this, because I don't know. I've only seen him play, I think I watched 7 games. I watched 7 games of his, and I liked what I saw, but it was for North Carolina, obviously. But if Ryan Pace is right about Mitch Trubisky, then suddenly this is going to be a lot easier to plug all these other holes because you have good quarterback play, and it takes the pressure off of every other position to be great.
Right, exactly. Well said.
Let's see. Next comment. Yeah, I don't know what Pace was thinking there. Giving up all those picks just to move up one spot, he may not last that much longer. If Mitch Trubisky is terrible, I fully agree with this comment. If Mitch Trubisky, but it's not going to be because he moved up all those picks. It's because that he went all in on a guy that stunk. Mitch Trubisky is going to be the defining moment for Ryan Pace. If Mitch Trubisky comes out and he's Joe Montana or, an amazing quarterback, there's going to be a statue of Ryan Pace in this city, and we're all going to worship him, and he's going to have steakhouses up and down the Gold Coast. And he'll be right next to Jordan's. Right there on Madison Street, there's going to be a statue. But if Mitch Trubisky just doesn't materialize, then ultimately that's going to be what makes Ryan Pace lose his job. So I agree with you, but this is his linchpin.
Yeah. Right, exactly. What you said about that guy's comment is exactly what I said. It all depends on what Trubisky does.
And I have rather them waited to see if Mitch Trubisky fell to number 3 and not had to give up all his picks. Yeah. But if Ryan Pace is right about Mitch Trubisky, then whatever they gave up, 2 third-rounders and a 4th-rounder, inconsequential. Inconsequential if Mitch Trubisky is what Ryan Pace thinks he is. And I don't know if you heard Bill Polian on ESPN 1000 the other day, but for those of you who don't know, Bill Polian he's a Hall of Fame former general manager, and is just a complete genius as far as football goes. And he said about Ryan Pace's draft move, he called it a stroke of genius, and says Ryan Pace knows exactly what he's doing. And that made me feel much more confident, because I'm scared to death of all the quarterbacks in this year's draft, and I don't think I would have had the cojones to make that call to even draft a quarterback number 3, let alone move up to number 2 and get him. But if Ryan Pace sees something and he's right on it, then he made us all look stupid.
Yeah, Exactly. And I hope he does make us all look stupid. I really hope that my anger on draft night makes me look like a total idiot.
absolutely.
I am praying for that.
Yeah,
I will be a happy idiot.
I will be the first one buying a Mitch Trubisky jersey and doing a dance of joy if I'm wrong. I would love to be wrong.
I've never wanted to be wrong about something in sports my whole life.
So next comment is, I slept after listening to your show, and I dreamed about how successful the Bears can be with Trubisky and also them trading Glennon for draft picks. I somewhat like the draft, but I prefer Xavier Woods from Louisiana Tech than Eddie Jackson from Bama. I'm glad that we gave you good dreams. That's awesome. I love to hear that.
I'd rather not give you nightmares.
Right there as well. As far as Xavier Woods over Eddie Jackson, I am right there with you. I read a lot of draft analysis and national people talking about the Bears draft, and a lot of people seem very high on Eddie Jackson as far as the Bears draft and him being the best choice that they had. And honestly, I thought it was their worst. I'm not that high on Eddie Jackson. If he comes back healthy, I think he's a project to be impact at safety, but I think he's a great special teamers to start. I think he's a much better special teamer than Xavier Woods would be, but I do like Xavier Woods. So I'm not against you there. I thought there was a lot more safeties that I would have liked to see over Eddie Jackson, but I think they were looking at it as he can step right in day one and be, as far as when they chose him, he's going to be the easiest projection to be an impact on special teams.
Yeah, definitely. I'd agree. And, I had my questions about Jackson too, but I also thought about the potential reward. The potential reward could be great.
I'm not saying that he's never going to be a starter. I'm just saying is right off the bat, he's going to be a very good special teamer. You can move him into the return game. He could be a bullet man. I think he'd be a great special teamer. But I think he's got I think it's going to take him a little time to develop to be a threat, to be a starter on defense. I think it's going to take him a year or two to figure out the league and the speed.
Yeah. There's questions here, there's questions there. It's at the point where you just got to say, we'll see how it develops and how it pans out.
And the last comment I have here is, I 100% agree with the decision to draft a quarterback with the number 3 pick. I 100% disagree with the decision to trade up to draft a quarterback at number 2. I'm going to do my best to eliminate opinion. Mine, Pace's, or anyone else. The main reason I disagree with the decision to trade up is there was no need to. Even if someone moved up to take Trubisky, Mahomes and Watson would have been available. While everyone has an opinion on who might be better, they are all generally regarded in the same vicinity talent-wise. Mahomes and Trubisky literally about percent differences in quarterback ratings. Trubisky did nothing results-wise that separated himself from Mahomes or Watson. Double-checking, yes, everything I said is factual. Now, everyone will have an opinion as to who is actually better, and I certainly have mine. But when you look at results, they are all in the same ballpark. Mahomes and Watson perhaps have a slight edge due to added years of tape and stats to support their findings. Simple as that, from my point of view. Toss in the fact that we had so many glaring needs, trading up was just a luxury we couldn't afford. I agree that Pace is tied to Trubisky now and that his future hinges on Trubisky's success. I agree that Glennon has been undermined in the eyes of the fans and staff and teammates. Yes, he'll be paid, but I don't think he came to Chicago with the intentions of being a bridge for anybody else. I didn't support the trade for Glennon, but the kid seems like a decent kid and has already played out the scenario once in his career. The Shaheen pick I felt was made because we didn't have a third-round pick. He was projected to go in the third round or fourth, but we no longer had a third round, and Pace probably feared he wouldn't be available by the time they were up again in the fourth. I truly believe the Bears would have been better off picking up a corner. The Jackson pick is skewed due to his history of injury. Last year's leg injury and the torn ACL the year before. I repeat, you can't bring in players that are injury prone, then use injuries as a reason for losing. Cohen is an interesting pick, and initially I was pretty down on him due to his size. I just have a hard time seeing somebody with this type of physical frame survive in the NFL level. The fact that he was a Division II only adds to that concern. Still, if he can hold up physically, I'll concede that via special teams and a scat back capacity, he could be very entertaining. Morgan really doesn't immediately address anything. Primarily a depth and developmental pick, so we'll see how it goes. I hope Fox has been assured that this year won't be held against him. The picks made were futuristic in scope and likely won't manifest into helping him win this year. I agree 8-8 is the absolute best this team could hope for, and a lot of things would have to happen to make that so. I expect this team to come in around 5-11. I suspect our secondary will be our greatest weakness, and offensively, I'm just not sure what to expect beyond Jordan Howard running the ball. I'm curious to see if Shaheen makes an impact this season. I'm curious to see how Glennon and the Trubisky situation plays out. I'm curious to see Cohen play. I'm curious to see if White can stay healthy and full season and what he would look like if he does. I'm curious to see if Floyd improves, plateaus, or declines. I could go on and on, but there are far too many questions we need answers to this year. Very, very long comment, and not a lot I wholeheartedly disagree with.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what he said.
Sort of disagreement is I watched a lot of tape on the quarterbacks in this draft, and I think Mahomes is he has a fantastic arm, but reading defenses and decision making scared me. I think he's going to be a very Jay Cutler like player, where he's going to show you flashes of awesomeness and maybe never materialize. That's my concern with him. And I think he went to a really good place in Kansas City with a great head coach who has his track record of developing quarterbacks. So Pat Mahomes went to probably the best place he could possibly go because there's no pressure on him. He's going to be behind Alex Smith, and he's going to be able to learn, and he's going to have Andy Reid right there with him. So I think that's going to be great. Deshaun Watson, fantastic athlete, great college quarterback. I just don't project him that well. He's not good at complicated defenses, which he's going to see a ton of, especially when he plays New England. Watch him when they play New England. He's going to throw 87 picks. He's going to show some dazzling moves, but I think you're just not going to see him materialize as a really great quarterback in this league. Mitch Trubisky was, from that very limited tape we had, a lot of things I liked, a lot of things that needed to be improved on, but his decision making and his accuracy and his ball placement when he throws the ball were all very good, all things that translate well into the next level. And so if the Bears were going to go early with a quarterback, I was most comfortable with Mitch Trubisky. And I think the Bears, when they evaluated the tape, they put Mitch Trubisky so far ahead of everybody else that if, that was the guy they wanted and they didn't want to settle on somebody else. And I think that's where I disagree because is maybe nobody was going to move up to that number 2 spot and take Trubisky, but Ryan Pace said that people made the call to try to trade with the Bears to move up number 3 to take Trubisky. Ryan Pace has said that. So maybe we'll never know if anybody tried to trade up with San Francisco other than the Bears, but the Bears knew that there was a real desire for somebody to move up to trade to get Trubisky, and they said, all right, the only way we can guarantee that we get him is moving up 1 spot. And that was the beauty of it, is Cleveland shot themselves in the foot by telling the world they were picking who they were picking number one. They shot themselves in the foot because it made, instead of having uncertainty in what was going to happen, they said, this is what we're doing, and this is what we want to do to trade back to get Trubisky. So it gave the Bears, Bears knew what other people were doing, some other people were doing, and they only had to move up one spot to guarantee the guy they wanted. So was anybody else going to trade up to get him? Maybe, maybe not. I would say maybe 10 to 20% they might. But if you are that high on a guy that you're willing to stake your whole career on him being a star, then, you give up what you give up. So, but the rest of these opinions, yeah, we have a lot of glaring holes. I hope Leonard Floyd improves. We saw improvement during the season, but he's going to have to make that jump. The secondary there's so many question marks at every single position in the secondary. Can we stay healthy? What's the wide receiver core going to look like? If Kevin White stays healthy, I feel like it could be all right. But if Kevin White gets hurt, that wide receiver core is pretty bad. I like the Cohen pick at running back. I just think he's a really good complementary back, and
there's a lot of upside on him from many people that I've talked to about him.
You get concerned about his size, but look at Warwick Dunn. Warwick Dunn was as workhorsey as you could get, and he was a tiny little man, and he could carry that burden. The big thing is if you look at Cohen, he's powerful. He would carrying defenders when they would try to tackle him. It was much different than Garrett Wolf that they drafted out of Northern Illinois several years ago, who a strong breeze blew him over. So I see you there. Morgan, I like him. I watched him play, and I like him. I think he's more than a developmental guy. I think he's somebody that can really win a position on this team in less than a year. And the Adam Shaheen I've heard numerous unnamed reports that have said that he was their secret weapon that people were planning to take that nobody wanted to talk about. But I don't think he would have been there in the third round. I think a lot of people really liked his ability. And I think it's going to take him a little bit to get used to it. Hopefully by the time that Zach Miller gets injured, Adam Shaheen is ready to play.
Sure, absolutely. And we talked about this before with the holes. Another thing that the team doesn't have, in addition to all these holes, they really never had any depth, at least the last few years. So at least adding some of this depth helps that. Because let's face it, you're a football team, you're going to get injured. Seems like the Bears love getting injured, so, depth is never a bad thing.
Even if we had, I agree that we traded back in the second round to recoup a pick because Ryan Pace didn't want to be without a pick. That totally happened.
Right.
And I think it probably didn't go how they expected it to. I think that somebody that they expected to be there was no longer there. And Adam Shaheen was their consolation prize. But it's a position of need, and he's a really talented guy. So I'm not sad about that pick. But honestly, we lose a third rounder. Were we going to pick up some guy that was going to absolutely change this defense? If we drafted a third round corner, was he going to be the reason that we went from 5-11 to 9-6? Probably not. So is it in the end going to be that big of a deal? And I think this comment was 100% accurate with John Fox. Is if John Fox was as surprised about this pick of Mitch Trubisky as I've read he was, I hope that Ryan Pace afterwards went up to him and said, yeah, we you're our long-term coach, or at least our multiple-year coach, because I would be freaked out, because I would, if my job was on the line, I would, for this year, I would have been like, no, I want Jamal Adams, I want Solomon Thomas, I want somebody that's going to step in day one and I can win with. Mitch Trubisky's not going to be, a lot of these guys are not going to be huge contributors this year. You have an offensive lineman who I think is going to make a big noise next year, a running back who is only going to probably get 5 to 8 touches a game, and a tight end who is going to take a little bit of time, and Eddie Jackson, who is an injury concern, and that's another point I fully agree on, is huge injuries history is, you'd think that Ryan Pace would not want to keep drafting guys with injury history. So, I don't know. But, I mean, the one huge major difference of opinion I have with this comment is I'm choosing to try to look at this as more of a glass half full, because that's all I can really do as a fan.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we really have no other option than to trust the process, because there's nothing we can do.
If this process doesn't work, I'm gonna be the first one when this show, comes on. I'm gonna be lambasting Ryan Pace. I will lead this charge. I'm not gonna. I love the Chicago Bears, and having them be bad is painful. But I want this rebuild to be. I would rather it be right than quick.
That's exactly. If you're going to take your time to do it right, then rush it and completely screw everything up, then you'll gladly take your time.
But I really...
We just hope that they take the time to do it right. That the time wasted is well spent. Not wasted,
I really love
but,
this comment.
take
it was really well thought out, and gave us a lot to comment on. And in the end, it's, we're just gonna have to see what happens. Is once July hits and training camp starts, we're gonna see how some of these guys look. Are injured guys healthy? What the depth chart is going to look like. And next week, I planned this week to look a little bit more at the depth chart, but just ran out of time. So next week, I'm hoping to look at a little bit of the draft chart and kind of use the crystal ball to see where we're going to be at come July.
Yep.
Well, do you have any other comments that things you want to bring up, Alex?
No, not really. Cubs just coughed up the lead. Kind of pissed about that. Looks like we're going to get swept. There's really not much to bring up about the Blackhawks, but, the Western Conference Finals are coming up, and it looks like it's going to be Nashville for sure, and whoever wins Game 7 of this Ducks and Oilers series. And I was just kind of wondering if you were paying attention at all to this.
I've been watching bits and
run.
pieces, much less than I usually watch, but I don't know who to root for. It's looking like it's going to be Predators. I hate the Predators. I don't like Anaheim. I don't like the Oilers. I guess the only team I'm going to root for is maybe the Capitals in the other conference. I might root for the Capitals. I might root for who are the Rangers playing? Ottawa, right?
Ottawa's the one that I'm kind of rooting for, but I feel like even if they win this series, they're not going to beat whoever wins the Caps Penn series. I just don't think they have the talent to keep up with that. But that's kind of who I'm bandwagoning for, honestly.
I can't root for anybody else. So, Western Conference, I'm going to just bleh. But I will watch the next game of that Game 7.
Yeah, it's really been some entertaining hockey over the past few weeks. Even though the Hawks got completely demolished, there's been some really fun hockey to watch for the hockey fan. So, you at least have that because, frankly, I think the NBA playoffs have been as boring
they've
as
been
heck.
so boring. It's
Like,
just,
I have
we
zero
all said at
interest
the beginning of the season it was
in
going to
it.
be Golden State versus Cleveland, and it's looking like it's going to be Golden State versus Cleveland. So,
It's like I really don't care until the finals, and even in the finals, I'm just not that interested in it. Like, if it goes to a 7th game like last year, I'll watch Game 7, no doubt, but not really into it. I don't particularly care for most of the teams in it. I don't really care for Boston. The Cavaliers are our biggest rival. Who else? The Rockets, man,
and Predators
care
did close
for
that
it.
out, so they won.
Right, they won
Yeah,
today.
so
they
they're
won
done. They're going
3-1.
Oilers won 7-1, so it's going to Game 7. So that's going to be a good one. I'm going to probably root for the Oilers there. But the Penguins Capitals game, I don't know how the Capitals are not playing that well, and they still have 2 wins, and even though they've gotten dominated in this series, so it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because they were down, 2-1 last night?
That's when
And then they came back
I turned it
and
off
won
and it was 2-1
4-2.
because I was at a friend's house and I was like, let's actually hang out. I don't know how they came back, but it is what it is. But I guess that's going to do it for this episode of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. Thank you guys so much for listening, and if you guys have questions, comments, concerns, hit us up on any of the social media. At ShyFanPat1, at Swerski Sports, Facebook.com/Swerski Sports, SwerskiSports.com. Share with your friends, subscribe on however you listen to podcasts, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube. And until next time, bear down.
Cubs win! What a lucky break! The good Lord wants the Cubs to win!
We thank Ditka and God for all they have provided.
Cubs win! Cubs win! Cubs win!
Oh, I don't want her. You can have her. She's a Packer fan. She can't fit in my van.
And she looks like number New Yorkers. Smoking crack is not legal on planes. Bears 31 to -7. The Bears.
Oh, when the Bears go bearing